This podcast is brought to you by BeginnersFab.com, the site that teaches you how to make useful, interesting, and creative things with basic tools. Think you don't have the fabrication tools necessary to make what you need? Think again. BeginnersFab.com. This is Off-Road Independence, the podcast that talks about trail repair, vehicle modification, and gear selection, helping you become more independent in your off-road adventures. Hi, and welcome to Off-Road Independence. I'm Mcgrew, your host. Today on our podcast, we're with Brad Blake. I've met Brad through Planet Isuzu, which is an Isuzu forum, and the forum has really helped me grow in the knowledge of my Isuzus and off-road experience as well. Brad has actually had a number of off-road vehicles, and currently he has at least one that I know of, which is his Isuzu Amigo, which he's done a SAS on. He has a few other things on it. So we're gonna talk to Brad not only about his Isuzu, but also about other aspects of off-roading. So, hey Brad, I'm really glad that you were able to get on with me today through Skype so that we could talk about this information on the podcast. Thanks for being with us.
No problem.
So, as I was mentioning, you have a 2000 Isuzu Amigo, right? What have you done to it?
First of all, it was a wreck. Frame was all destroyed, so I put it back on the road and then started rebuilding the old frame, cut the front off, and I knew that I wanted to go solid axle. So at that point, it was just clean off all the brackets and everything, and I wanted to step that one up. My previous one was leaf spring, so I had already been playing with 4-link suspension, so I went ahead and built a front 4-link suspension using rear parts, so pretty much kind of factory stuff, just, reusing it.
What axle did you use on the front end for your swap?
On the late model, they suggest using like a Dana 44 out of the Jeep Wagoneers. I was lucky and got an axle with it, so it's kind of a pre-programmed build.
Okay. And did you say you did 4-link on the front?
Yes.
And why did you go with a 4-link on the front instead of like a typical 3-link? Because I hear, especially in mid-size SUVs a lot of time, the 3-link is just simpler due to lack of, less moving parts and geometries and that kind of stuff.
The factory upper links go triangulated. The bushings are square, so, it's kind of funny of a thrust situation. But the reason I did that is I was building this chassis while I was driving the Amigo on a factory frame. And reason being to do it that way is I knew it would clear the exhaust and the oil pan and all that, so that when I had it all done, I got to my shop on Monday morning, started tearing it apart, and pulled the body, pulled the motor, powertrain, and all that. Had to switch rear ends to keep the gear ratios the same, and then put it all back together the next day and drove it home.
How long did it take in total then?
Day and a half.
And that's pretty good for a full-on SAS on a vehicle like that.
Well, the SAS part was done, so I had the rolling chassis, and I had to pull the body, the bumpers, motor and tranny, all that stuff, and then roll out the one frame and roll in the other frame, and it was kind of, I just wanted to see how quick I could do it.
Yeah. So let's clarify a little bit for maybe some of the the guys that are beginners to off-road or something like that, right? You've done a solid axle swap on the front, or converted your vehicle from independent front suspension, which means you have two separate CV axles running from a stationary differential. And now you have a solid front axle with the chassis sitting on springs, so that it moves linearly, correct?
Yes.
Now, what's the benefit of having that solid axle under the front of your vehicle instead of the independent front suspension?
Obviously, with a 4-link, you still have quite a few moving parts that can, wear parts, but it's a lot stronger as far as punishment-wise. And obviously you lose a little bit of clearance because you have the whole axle acting like a big piece of steel down there.
Mm-hmm.
But you have so much more travel in general. You know, IFS can only go so far. Even the late model stuff, it has more travel than the early stuff with shorter A-arms, but you're still limited. And you can do lifts, and I played that game and tested how much I could go with the factory one, but the late model stuff also has a rack and pinion, so there again, you can only go as far as that thing will allow you to just have a nice, robust setup.
Yeah, and to be able to have more articulation, let's say, with the suspension, whether it be drop or whether it be compression, but without damaging as many parts typically, right?
Oh, yeah.
With your truck, I mean, clearly you've done quite a bit of fabrication with the SAS on it, but with like the rear links and that kind of stuff, is that truck, it's leaf spring, right?
No.
Or is it coil? It's coil. Okay.
It's coiled at all four corners, and the rear was, factory 4-link, and you're limited on the left upper corner, and I built an angled arm to clear the gas tank a little bit better, and I finally one day had an idea for doing a 3-link, and it worked out really good. So now it's 3-link in the rear, and once again using a factory lower arm that's just been, I took like an inch and a half out of it, put it up, in the center on the rear, and it actually worked out better. I guess I've heard that they get wheel hop and stuff off road,
mm-hmm.
and so now it actually pushes down instead of, you take off, and the rear end used to sink.
Yeah.
And now it just stays level. So, and pretty much I haven't really had it too much off-road since I've done all this other work
mm-hmm.
to actually test it. But I mean, it's great on the road, and that's the important part too.
Yeah, I mean, yours is a daily driver, right? Plus it's your off-road rig.
Yes, at least 50 miles a day.
Yeah, so I mean, that's always a challenge. I mean, at least for me. I mean, I have a Trooper, and mine's kind of like more expedition setup. It's only lifted like 1 3/4 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's always a challenge to find that nice balance between on-road drivability and getting what you want out of it off-road, and in trenches and ravines and rock and mud or whatever. So
yeah.
Now you mentioned that you brought your link. You cut about an inch out. You brought it up to the center of the center axle line, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
And you did that because it helped with that wheel hop then?
Well, the bonus of that is then I have basically unlimited down travel, as far as as the U-joints permit,
mm-hmm.
and actually the other, because with coil suspension, I have a sway bar front and rear. And the rear sway bar, even with longer links, would hinge and bottom out or go back, and it would hit on the diff of the axle. And so I ended up cutting the sway bar, did an experiment, because you wouldn't think that you can cut spring steel because they're designed to test. So I rotated it and put it back together, rotated it forward probably 3-4 inches, which, about 25-30 degrees. And then as the axle comes down, the hoop that goes over the top, has more back travel.
I gotcha.
Keeps all the geometry pretty good.
I hadn't even thought of that. That's a pretty good idea.
Still flexes good too.
Wow. See, that's one thing I noticed, like on my Trooper, the rear flexes really well, especially with the Ullman AMU 929 springs that I have on it. But the front end, because I've still got an IFS, I'm still running the independent front suspension.
Yeah.
The factory sway bar, it's like a brick. It almost doesn't move at all. You know what I mean?
Yes. Well, I did a test with the front, and I actually cut it in the middle, and then put bushings, like sleeves,
mm-hmm.
and flat plate over that so that it plugs together. One side slips into the bushing, and then you put a bolt in.
I got you.
So it locks it. And for on-road driving, it's been great. I've had it come loose a couple times, the bolt come loose,
mm-hmm.
and it allows it just a little bit of flex. And you can tell with body roll. And it's makes a big difference.
Yeah.
But you get to off-roading, and obviously you want to be level as you can be to pull the bolt. But once that comes out, you'll actually see the two pieces will hinge opposite over 2 inches. So it makes that much of a difference. It frees up the front end to really flex. You could try that with yours too.
I'm gonna have to ask you for a photo of that so I can see it and get that to work. Do you have a photo of that left around or anything?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, well, I'll definitely get that from you, and I'll put it up on the site with this podcast so that everybody can see more visually what you're talking about as well.
Yeah, it's kind of, without a picture, you're just guessing.
I got what you're saying to a large degree, but I'd like to make sure that I'm clear on it too. Good, man, that's a really good idea. I hadn't thought of that at all. Well, you're running a 3-link in the back, so I'm assuming you have a Panhard bar still back there, right?
Oh, yes. Yeah, both ends.
Now, the front and rear are running Panhard bars, and you said you adjusted or changed slightly your links on the rear of the Amigo as well. What are you using for the rod ends? Are you using poly bushings or Heim joints or flex joints or?
For the longest, I was using the factory stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I used factory ends up front, as a matter of fact, when I first built it. And then I lifted it with aftermarket Jeep coils.
Mm-hmm.
And I was using factory Jeep coils to begin with. And so anyway, put those in, and I probably gained another 2.5 inches.
Okay.
And after I got out on the freeway and I started having issues with it weaving back and forth, and I think part of that was the stupid locker that I put in the rear, the gear lock. But anyway, so I, went back to the shop and I started revamping. And now what I'm using is poly bushings. And I've used them in a lot of different things, like the ones that you would use at a Ford F-350, like the shackle bushings and stuff, spring eye bushings. They're a good size. You can find lots of tubing with, the ID that those slide into really well. And the shackle end ones are really narrow. So it gives you a lot of, it's workable.
Yeah, on my Daihatsu I ran, there's a small company out of, oh man, I'm probably going to get this wrong. I think it's Utah, and it's Summit Machine. And I bought some of their, I want to say I bought JK Flex bushings or one of their cartridge. No, I bought their standard cartridge bushings in the end. The flex joints.
Mm-hmm.
And I put those on one end, and then I put poly bushings on the other end. So I have poly bushings on the axle end, flex bushings on the chassis end, and then I have over the differential on the top member of the 3-link.
Mm-hmm.
I have the flex bushing over the axle on the truss, and I have the poly bushing on the chassis side.
Now, is your rear suspension, the upper link, is it triangled?
No, it's just a solid link on a truss that goes over the...
Okay. Have you ever... buddy of mine has a Land Rover, and they actually have a triangle-shaped 2 bushings up front attaching to the frame, and then center mount that goes to the axle. It's quite interesting to see.
Yeah, I've thought about doing that. I've actually seen a couple of... I've even seen a few that run it kind of triangulated like that, but with a uniball joint on the chassis side at the top.
Metal?
Yeah, it's a metal uniball joint that they actually weld a plate to, thread it with threaded holes that are tapped,
Okay, similar to what they use on like the Toyotas, the front IFS?
Yeah, or those that they use on like the box trucks for the steering up front, the big, thick uniball joints.
Okay.
And it seems to work okay, and in fact, some people have been able to eliminate their Panhard bar like that. But, I'm without it being completely triangulated, I'm a little leery of getting rid of my Panhard bar.
Well, one solution creates another problem or stress, too.
Yeah.
Then transfer the stress somewhere else.
Exactly. So, I'll look into the idea, and I've been playing with it because, as you know, in my BeginnersFab videos, I'm starting to redo all of that stuff. You know what I mean? So I'm kind of replaying the idea of what I'm doing with the Daihatsu in mind and how I'm going to redo that 3-link anyway, because as I mentioned, that was the first 3-link I tried, and it was the first suspension I did with an arc welder or a stick welder. And in the end, I overheated the cross member.
Oh, really?
In the chassis, yeah. When I was welding, I overheated it, and over time, the axe rolling back and forward because, well, there's a number of problems, but it actually ripped the tabs off the cross member.
Oh, wow.
And I heard this horrible slapping noise, and I stopped, and it was my top member, the top link, falling down and hitting the U-joints of the drive shaft and bouncing up against the bottom of the truck. Yeah, it wasn't real good.
I'm a heavy construction mechanic, and even the biggest, thickest, heaviest stuff built, after time it flexes and it fatigues and it still breaks. So, I mean, all you can do is try to do your best.
Yeah, I mean, that's all you can do, and that's what I'm trying to do with all this stuff. I've learned a lot, too, so that helps a lot as well, you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. Well, I made a great mistake when I first did my rear 3-link. I had this big tube that spanned the frame, and I built a great mount plate with adjustable holes and stuff, but I hadn't got around to running another cross member and then running thrust bars.
Yeah.
So I decided, let's see how well it'll get traction on gravel. I dumped the clutch, and it kind of felt like the clutch tried to slip because it hooked up so good. Didn't spin much. And I noticed it was kind of riding funny, and then I realized, looked underneath, and the pinion was pointed up about 2 more inches, and that whole crossbar was bent.
Yeah, I mean, you try to design well, and you try to build well, but in the end, you're imperfect, and I don't mean you, I mean in general, you as a person. And I'm like, sometimes I look back and I'm like, that was the dumbest idea. Why did I even try to weld to like 1.5 millimeter thick, which is basically 0.63 thick wall, a 1/4 inch plate that were the tab holders, It's like, that was the dumbest idea ever. So, but you learn.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's like a unibody or something. You start working on Jeeps. Some of those are all unibody, and they lift them, and then all the extra thrust and travel just starts tearing everything apart. And it's unibody, so you're kind of hosed by the time it's said and done. What are you going to do?
Yeah, I mean, you just have to keep repairing it or give up and move on to something else. So you just have to make that choice at that time and try to treat it the best you can. We've talked a lot about Isuzus, but you haven't only had Isuzus for off-road vehicles, right?
Oh, no, I've had several different. I've had Chevys, and I have a Ford and Volkswagen stuff.
And so with your years of experience in off-roading, what would you say your more typical style of off-roading is? Because, I mean, we know today the off-road motorsports area is just, I mean, it's so wide, What is kind of your preferred genre of off-road motorsports?
I like the sightseeing part of it, getting up in the woods, the fresh air, good views and stuff. I'm not always excited to go get on that trail that's tipping you towards the edge and your heart's thumping out of your chest because you don't know if you're going to make it or roll, And the other, I used to have a lot of time down in the sand too. Mm-hmm. And that to me is, it's a lot of fun. People think that sand is hard on your bearings. I ran a buggy for years down in the sand. I never really lost anything. Wheel bearings, the CVs and stuff. Year after year, I used to take that thing down and go cruise around. I broke more stuff because I was hot rodding on it. But that's fun because the sand dunes are so smooth. Mm-hmm. And you can do 60, 70 miles an hour and you're not eating dust from somebody in front of you.
Yeah, I mean, where I live in Chile, there's not really sand dunes, but I know up north in like the Atacama Desert, which is the driest desert in the world, a lot of the Chilean guys drive from Santiago like 6-7 hours north or even further, a full day north to get into these remote dunes. And they have like Toyota Hiluxes, which are basically a really simplified version of the Tacoma. Or they have the old FJ40s and FJ60s. Or they're running, the amount of Suzuki Samurais out there is insane. And they put V6s and V8s in them.
Oh, wow.
They supercharge and turbocharge them, and they run them all over the dunes, and they just love it. That's a really big aspect of off-road motorsports in Chile, at least. So,
Oh, yeah. Well, that's the bonus, smooth going, and you have a lot of power going up a hill that's, that steep. It's pretty impressive. And when you have something that's built for it and has the power to do it, you just kind of giggle like a little kid.
Well, speaking of kids, one of the aspects I've known about you from the forum and from just talking to you through emails and stuff like that is that you actually use your off-road rig a lot, or relatively a lot, as much as you can, to be able to really spend time with your kids too, right? You use it for like fishing and taking them camping and that kind of stuff as well, correct?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I've had a few adventures with my little boy back when he was in diapers. Oh, that was fun.
And how do they react to that? To Dad taking them out in the woods and basically to them a monster of a machine and just having fun and camping.
Oh, they love it. They treat the cage on the Amigo like it's monkey bars, so I have to keep reminding them to get off. But until it's painted, I won't stress that.
Yeah. Well, and it's good. I mean, really, I see that that's a real benefit to, the off-road lifestyle, depending on the kind that you have. But it can really be an aspect, a tool to help the families out as well, at least from what I see, because I'm sure that's drawing, helping your kids draw closer to you and to grow closer to you and to have a better, parent relationship, especially today when, man, it just seems like stuff is so hectic and it's hard to find time sometime for that kind of stuff.
Video games. There's been several times it's like, oh, come on, we're going to go on a trip, go up and meet some people and play in the woods and, have a good time. I've had them up in the snow and stuff.
That's very, very cool. Now, well, Brad, we've been talking for a little while now, and I really appreciate all the information. It really is a joy to talk to you. You're very, very intelligent with this stuff just from a lot of years of experience with it, and I can tell that you read a lot about what you're doing, and we've talked about that on the forum too before. So, your wealth of knowledge, I really hope to be able to have you on the show again here in the future. So I appreciate you taking your time out of your schedule to be with us here on the podcast, and I'll try to keep you in mind for the future shows if you're willing to do it. And this information that you talked about with us is really beneficial, not only for Isuzu owners, but I understand that there's a bunch of brands out there. People can buy all kinds of different vehicles. So there's a bunch of information here, and hopefully, like I mentioned before, Brad can be back on here with us. So Brad, thanks a lot for being here with us.
No problem. It was my pleasure.